Over the years, MMA fans have become accustomed to injuries during fights, and most of us even expect bruises and cuts when two beasts battle in the octagon. Every once in a while, we see wounds that are so gruesome they burn a hole in our minds forever. From ripped out body parts to fractured skulls, we'll be looking at the top 10 serious injuries we've witnessed in mixed martial arts. Former light heavyweight Jon Jones might own the title for the youngest champion in UFC history, but even he isn't immune to fight-related injuries. Look back to UFC 159. His fight against Chael Sonnen should be fresh on his fans' minds due to the ghastly toe injury he suffered during the bout. Jones won the fight via technical knockout, so the adrenaline pumping through his veins helped mask the pain, and he couldn't identify when it happened or how. It took the intervention of ringside announcer Joe Rogan to point out that he might need some medical assistance ASAP. Words aren't enough to describe the awkward position his toe ended up in. You just have to spend a few minutes looking at it to understand just how painful it might have felt for Jones at that moment. Shogun Rua is a UFC legend with many fights under his belt, but he will never forget his bout against Mark Coleman because of the gnarly injury that cost him the fight. A minute into the fight, Coleman implemented a move that saw Rua falling and breaking his arm in the most fascinating and murderous manner one could picture. It didn't stop there, though. Despite Rua being down, Coleman followed the brutal fall with tons of strikes and bloody punches. All hell broke loose, and in the aftermath, Rua was left with a nasty dislocated elbow. Days after, Shogun took to Instagram to show his fans just how well he had recovered, but fans were shocked to see a swell that looked like a golf ball. The photos proved that it was more severe than we all imagined. It's not every day you come across unique injuries like what happened to Alistair Overeem at Capital One Arena in Washington, D.C. Overeem was just seconds away from defeating Jairzinho Rozenstruik at a UFC Fight Night on December 7th, when a savage right hand caused a massive split in his lip. Today, Alistair Overeem might laugh about the injury, but when it happened, it was one of the scariest things that could happen to a person. It was one of those injuries you couldn't look at for more than 10 seconds. On closer inspection, it looked like a part of his lip was torn from his face when Rozenstruik's punch grazed his lips. Being a beast, Alistair Overeem was unfazed by his injury, but we're sure the referee couldn't believe what was happening right in front of him, so he had to end the fight. Former UFC middleweight champion Chris Weidman suffered a severe injury that will always be fresh on the minds of those who attended UFC 261. The fight was a rematch of Weidman's first-round TKO of Combat Banner in 2010. The fight was instantly called off, as fans could see Weidman's tibia break through the skin of the 185-pound fighter. The footage of his swinging lower leg was so disgusting that it was only twice replayed on the broadcast. Weidman was removed from the stage on a stretcher after his leg was placed into a compression sleeve and gave a thumbs up to the crowd, despite a clear expression of pain on his face. 54 days later, after the tragic injury, Weidman had to return for more surgery because it wasn't healing correctly. UFC fighters understand the stakes for playing their trade, but we're sure nobody expected such a gruesome injury. When Joanna Jedrzejczyk stepped into the octagon to face Weili Zhang in UFC 248, she never expected to leave with one of the gnarliest injuries in UFC history. During the third round of the fight, it became apparent that something was wrong with Jedrzejczyk, as her head began to swell. By the fifth round, the hematoma became so large it began to scare most people, who could only watch in horror. This injury was caused when Weili Zhang head-butted Jedrzejczyk, but that wasn't enough to stop the fight. At the end of the night, Jedrzejczyk looked unrecognizable, and the fans began to say she looked like an alien. It took 5 days for the swelling to go down, as the Poland star had to undergo minor surgery from a plastic surgeon on her ear to make a full recovery. Of all the injuries on this list, a broken arm sounds rather mundane, but on closer inspection, Antonio Nogueira's broken arm is the stuff of nightmares. Rodrigo is by no means a novice, with over 16 years of experience and 46 professional fights. Yet it wasn't enough to save him from the brutal injury that occurred at UFC 140. After seeing photos of the break, Frank Mir, the perpetrator, was utterly disturbed, which shows just how bad Rodrigo had it that night. Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira was forced into a 60-day medical rest as he had 16 screws plunged into his arm in a scary surgery. Arm locks are still very popular in UFC and mixed martial arts in general, so it's safe to say that we will see a lot more arm breaks in the future. We just hope they aren't as scary as what Antonio Rodrigo had to go through. UFC 180 will be remembered for its high-octane fights with Leslie Smith's grim ear injury that silenced the crowd. The first round of Leslie Smith's fight with Jessica Eye was entertaining, but things quickly took a turn for the worse when a right hook landed on Leslie Smith's cauliflower ear. The ear exploded, spraying blood all over the arena, and the referee was left with no choice but to end the fight then and there. Smith wasn't happy with the decision, but after what everyone had just witnessed, it would be madness to let the fight continue. UFC fighters are used to blood, but when a body part explodes, leaving the octagon bloody, everyone knows it's time to put down the gloves and get medical help. Aldo Jones' fight against Mark Hominick was watched by more than 55,000 spectators, and they all watched in horror as Mark Hominick took a barrage of punches that gave him a hematoma. The swelling on Hominick's head was so bad, it looked like he was just about to grow another head. To make matters worse, Hominick also sustained a cut under his right eye, which dripped blood all over his face. After the fight, he was taken into the emergency ward to reduce the swelling or inspect whether it had caused some serious head injury or not. By the end of the fight, spectators couldn't care less about who won. All they could talk about was the frightening injury they had just witnessed. When a fighter almost loses an eye, you know something went horribly wrong in the fight. In this case, Matt Mitrione fractured his orbital and dislocated his shoulder in a fight against Travis Brown. The fight was pretty even until the third round, when Brown launched a right cross that grazed his opponent's right eye and instantly swelled Mitrione's eye, not just once, but twice over the course of the fight. It didn't take long before Mitrione's eye got as large as a golf ball, and he couldn't see anything with his eye. It was a horrific experience for those who saw it up close, and a horrible experience for Mitrione, who had to live through it. Evangelista Santos' 2016 fight against Michael "Venom" Page led to one of the scariest moments in MMA history. During the fight, Michael "Venom" Page landed a devastating knee hit to the forehead that was brutal to watch. Santos went to the ground immediately and was rushed to the hospital. Most spectators didn't think too much of the strike, but later revealed that X-rays showed that Santos' forehead was cracked and would need life-threatening surgery if he hoped to survive. Evangelista Santos' fractured skull is the scariest mixed martial arts injury we've ever seen, and sometimes we wonder how he even survived after such a terrifying incident. After recovering, Santos called it quits on his MMA career, and if you ask us, it was the right choice. What do you think about our list of the top 10 gruesome injuries in mixed martial arts? Drop us a comment if you think we missed an injury that deserves to be on the list.